Yes, and now we start with module number 1 with the basics for digital treatment planning in aligner orthodontics. And these basics are the most important input when you start treatment planning, but also if you do it since years to really understand what could be the effect to make my treatment plans even more predictable and to have less refinements, and also to reduce the treatment planning process and to make it much more efficient. So we start with the module 1 with the fundamentals, and today we talk first about Anchorage. Knowledge, identification and modification. Everything needs to come together for you to end up with your perfect digital treatment plan. A solid foundation of basic knowledge is the key to success. Before you can start with aligners and digital treatment planning, you need a solid foundation, and this is your solid knowledge. This includes understanding, biomechanics, terminologies, and also the different parameters of the software. With the knowledge you have, you will be able to identify aspects within the planning process, develop strategies, and also, and I think this is most important, recognize errors, recognize software errors, software problems, and so on. And we will go very, very deep in this topic. By considering the first 2 points, you will be able to create a perfect plan and modify treatment plans according to your preferences. We can see in module 2, we will go very deep in the clinical preferences, because you and also we as a treatment planning service, we really need to understand what are your specific preferences. And this is very nice because we can individualize it, and then you can see it in all your future treatment plans. Knowledge, identification, and modification. Without knowledge, I can't do a modification. Without identification, I can't do a modification. Because if I don't identify the problem, if I don't identify where I want to go, what is my main goal, I'm not able to modify. Module 1 basics, we talk about Anchorage. So what is Anchorage? Where does Anchorage come from? How to create Anchorage, and how Anchorage affects your individual clinical results. So at first, what we need to understand in orthodontics, and even more in aligner orthodontics, Anchorage refers to the stability and resistance provided by certain teeth or dental structures during the application of forces to move other teeth. Especially for aligners, we have even more problem because we only have the teeth structure. It ensures that the desired tooth movements occur efficiently and without unwanted displacement of anchorage teeth. And that's the biggest problem with aligner orthodontics. But there are a lot of tricks, and we will go in detail and I will explain you all these tricks. Anchorage in aligner treatments. Number 1, large clinical crowns. It's very easy. The bigger the clinical crown, the more anchorage. I have the undercut. The aligner is really able to grab the crown and is able to have a very nice anchorage in this large clinical crown. But I can also do aligner treatments with small clinical crowns. But I need to say, the smaller the crown, the less undercut I have, the harder it is to get anchorage. And therefore we go to number 2. Of course, we have attachments, we have cuts, so we can create additional anchorage. And for some cases, we need definitely to do it. We need to have additional attachments, additional cuts, and so on. And yes, I will explain you in detail when and how I need additional attachments. And yeah, at the end, it's very easy if I have a very good structure for that. Staging and movement patterns. So you can see a staging pattern here on the right side. And when I see the staging, I can tell you, okay, it's a semi-sequential movement, 33%. We move more than 2 teeth at the same time. We will go very deep in the staging patterns. I will explain it exactly in detail also for the different software. So as we know, we have the Invisalign software. So this is what we do since 20 years. We have the Spark software. The staging is a little bit different. We have the Angel Aligner software, and it's very interesting. Even we got new tips and tricks of doing staging sometimes differently. For example, if we do space closure, something like that. And yeah, we have also the ClearCorrect software. And the interesting part is that also the staging I can see in the software differently. I need to find out when I have the right staging. So what I need to say is, at the end, it doesn't matter which type of software I use. I need the right staging pattern for Anchorage, and that's it. We need to set the right priorities. For me, this is, wow, one of the most important things in digital treatment planning, and also something where I see the most of the mistakes. Why? Because we have a lot of AI, a lot of artificial intelligence. We have algorithms in the software, which is beautiful. But these software patterns, they are not made to set priorities. You are made to set the priorities. You know what is most important for your patient. So you are the one programming the software in the right way and setting the right priorities. Otherwise, the software always will do, let's say, everything at the same time, which could be very, very frustrating. Trimline. So is there really an effect of the trimline for your treatment planning process? Can you change the trimline? How to change the trimline? And for what type of cases do you need to change the trimline? Is it possible with every software to change the trimline? That's a very interesting topic. And there is software, you can do it by Spark, also for Angel. You have a different trimline with ClearCorrect. And for some movements, it really makes sense, to go a little bit over the gingiva with the trimline. And yes, we change it for some cases. We change it if we have a very retroclined upper anteriors and we have the retroclined pattern protocol with the proclination, intrusion, retraction, and at the moment we have the huge amount of retraction. Yes, sometimes we change the trimline. It really makes sense. But here also we need to we need to have the knowledge, and we need to understand when and how to change the trimline. And also, and this is important for you to understand. So I'm a dental technician, so I know on one hand the orthodontist and the need of the orthodontist, but on the other hand, I also know and understand the technician and sometimes the problems of the technician, because sometimes the technician doesn't know exactly how you treat your patient if you use auxiliaries. And the technician doesn't need to know that, but the technician needs to understand which type of staging is the best for you. So if you use Tets, implants, hybrid technique, if you use a bend slider, yes, of course, you can do a lot of movements much more simultaneously, but this needs to be communicated, and you also need to understand which type of movements I can do more simultaneously, which type of movements I need to do more sequential. So this is very often very specific, and in our next 8 modules we will explain everything 100% in detail. How to create anchorage. What you can see here is what we can find sometimes. We have very short clinical crowns. We try to do some movements. We try to do a distalization movement. We try to upright tooth or something like that. It's very easy when the clinical crown is too short, when I don't have any anchorage, the aligner is not able to apply the right forces. With attachments, and we will talk in the next modules about attachment setting more in detail. Today it's more about the basics. When we set the attachments, of course, the aligner can grab the attachment. The aligner is able to do bodily movements in a more easy way. We can apply the forces differently, and but it's not only about setting the attachments. More important is to set the staging correctly. And especially when it comes to an anterior posterior correction, to an AP correction, what we can see very often that the staging pattern is not 100% perfect. It is okay, but sometimes it is too simultaneously, as we can see here. And at the moment, we can see there is one tooth. We like to have anchorage to move more than 2 teeth at the same time. And at this moment, 100%, we will lose anchorage, and we need to be very careful. So to set the correct staging, so for most of the cases, we use the 50% sequential distalization protocol. And I will today give you also different examples of the software. I will show you in the software how these movements look like. And now I will give you the first example. So here you can see staging for a semi-sequential distalization 50% with Invisalign. And I will explain you the most important part is that you should never move more than 2 teeth at the same time. So here you start with a 7. And you can see when the 7 is distalized 50%, you can see it here in the staging pattern. At stage number 5, this is 1.7, we move it to the distal. At stage number 5, we continue with the 6. Now we move the 6 to the distal, and very important, when the 7 is distalized 100%, you can see it in stage 10 to 11, we continue with tooth number 5 and so on. Very important is that we should not start too early moving the canine. You can also see another protocol. So we have an aesthetic start. We have the retrocline pattern protocol for the anteriors. We have a frog staging. So there are different types of protocols. But the first thing that you need to understand is never moving more than 2 teeth at the same time for distalization. So you need to set the staging correctly, set the correct staging, 50% sequential distalization, and be very careful with this protocol. We can see in some cases that this protocol is not in the right way, that there are too many teeth moved at the same time, and I will give you now 2 examples of how we shouldn't do this movement. So here you can see a very classical distalization for Invisalign, and you can see the staging pattern. So when I have a look at the staging pattern, I can see, okay, 1/7 is moved from the beginning till stage 16, but we already moved the 6 from stage 5, and we move already tooth number 5 at stage 11. So we have 3 teeth at the same time. And we can see the more teeth I move at the same time, of course, the more anchorage I lose. And this is the most critical time. So you can see that we move both premolars and the canine to the distal. And now it gets even more critical. We also move the anteriors with the premolar and the canine at the same time. And yes, this is very critical because we only have 3 teeth for anchorage for 4, and we know that we will lose anchorage here. So this is very critical, and we are very, very careful with these movements. And we also change this protocol to the 50% distalization. So here you can see the 50% distalization. So we have the 7, 6, 5, 4, and now with the canine and the anteriors. So we should never move the canine before the premolar is distalized completely. So this is what we call the 50% sequential distalization protocol. But in the next modules, we will explain that even more in detail. But it's important for you to understand that it is so important to use the right staging or the right anchorage, especially when it comes to AP correction, but also when it comes to different movements like expansion, posterior intrusion. So we have so many different movements, and we always need to be very careful with our staging protocol. We also can program distalization 100% sequential, but this I will explain when we get in the more advanced modules. Gaining even more anchorage by using elastics. Why? Because we know every movement has a side effect. Even if I'm doing the distalization completely sequential, I'm only starting with the 7, I have some reciprocal side effects. I need to be careful, and that's the reason why it helps a lot if we use auxiliaries, if we use elastics, not only for distalization, also for crossbite correction, also for different types of movement. Of course, if I have a class 3 correction, if I have a little distalization in the lower arch, we need to be very careful with placing elastics. Some doctors, they use elastics at the end for midline correction, for perfect finishing. And so there are a lot of tips and tricks, a lot of things that I can use, but I need to understand, how to use them and also how to place them in the software. So we have different ideas of using elastics, of using auxiliaries. So we have buttons, we have cutouts, we have also some very special 360-degree buttons, for example, for the Angel Aligner software. We have a different type of button in the Spark software. And as already explained in the next modules, I will go very deep, and I will also explain the differences in the different software and the benefits of the different systems in different software. This is something that is for me absolutely most important. We talk about setting the right priorities. And this is a very good example. This is an example of a deep bite correction. And in my opinion, one of the mistakes that happens in most of the cases. Why is it like that? The software is not able to set the right priorities because the software is thinking with AI and with algorithms. If the algorithm of the software is to end up with a perfect curve of spee, with a perfect arch bow, with a perfect derotation of all rotations, doesn't matter if it's in the canine, premolar, molar area, and the anteriors, yes, we have a perfect setup, but the big question is it the perfect setup for the software, for the patient, for you, and also do I have set the right priorities? So is it really like that? Does it really make sense to, in every case, to correct the curve of speed, to do a derotation of premolars and so on, if the most important part is, as an example, to do anterior intrusion because I have a deep bite? And this is, in all these 8 modules, one of the most important things to understand. We will also talk in another module about artificial intelligence. Then you will understand it a little bit better why the software is doing that. But yeah, setting the right priorities is very important. Keep it simple. Keep it simple doesn't mean that we do not want to achieve the perfect result. It means we need to do the movements step by step, and we need to focus on what is most important. If I have a deep bite, I need to set priorities and I need to focus on anterior intrusion. We get very often the question, hey Matthias and TP Academy team, what should I do first? Should I start with premolar derotation or should I start with anterior intrusion? And I always give this question back because I ask, what is most important for you? What do you really need to achieve? So then you have your answer. And the answer in most of the cases, in 80%, is, oh yes, most important is I need to get out of the deep bite problem, out of the deep bite situation. I need to focus on anterior intrusion. And so I know I need to do it step by step. I first need to start with the anterior intrusion movements. So what we do in our treatment planning process, we remove unnecessary movements. We remove the movements that we get from the artificial intelligence and the algorithms of the software. We reduce a little bit the rotation in the premolar area. We focus more on Anchorage, to achieve what we would love to achieve. And also, of course, we set attachments that we need for Anchorage, for the movements that we need to do. And to do both at the same time is not very realistic. So we set attachments and we use the reciprocal forces. In this particular case, for the anterior intrusion, we don't necessarily need an attachment. I will explain this in the next modules where we talk about attachments. The most important thing is that we got this reciprocal forces, that we can grab the aligners in the area of the premolars, and then we can give the power to the anteriors for the anterior intrusion. How to create Anchorage? Yes, we can also create Anchorage if we adapt and change a little bit the trim line. But now we need to understand that not with every system we can do that, and it's also not always necessary. So let's talk about the 4 big systems: Invisalign, Angel Aligner, Spark, and ClearCorrect. So with Invisalign, we always have the trim line at the gingiva margin. And we have a very good system because we have optimized attachments. We have a system that really works, and we don't necessarily need to change the trim line. But we tested this with another system. So just as an example, with ClearCorrect, we can see that the trim line always goes a little bit over the gingiva. With Spark and Angel Align, we can also adapt the trim line sometimes if that needs to be done. And that's very interesting. So for some cases, if we have very retroclined upper anteriors, and we have the 3 different steps of movements like proclination, intrusion, and retraction, what we can see sometimes is that, especially when it comes to the third part of the retroclined pattern, which is the bodily retraction of the anteriors, it could help if the aligner goes a little bit over the gingiva. And this is something that some of the doctors, they like to program it, and they have very nice results. It's very interesting. So in some particular cases, you can extend to get better anchorage. So you can change it, you can play with it. And again, in the next modules, I will explain you in the software how you can change the trim line and how you can adapt the trim line. Now I will open 3 different cases with different software, just to show you and to explain you how you can identify where is the trim line in the digital treatment plan. So here you can see the first case. I will show you the Spark software. And what I really like is that in the Spark software, you can see exactly the trim line. So what you can see here in green, so this is the trim line, and this can be modified. So I can change a little bit the trim line, but the very important point is that I need to communicate this to the technician. It's not like that I can grab the trim line and change it. I need to explain to the technician, okay, just as an example, if I have a look at the upper anteriors for the last stages when it comes to the retraction. So now you can see at stage 34, we have the retraction. Maybe I would like to adjust the trim line only for the retraction. And this is very easy to do. I can communicate this to the technician, and I can say from stage 35 to 50, please adjust the trim line and go 1.5 millimeter over the gingiva to support the retraction movement. Yes, so this is the Spark software. Now we will change to another software. So this is an Angel case, which is very interesting. You can see this is a case with CBCT integration. And what we can see here, it's also, as we already discussed, we have a special staging here. So this is, if we have a look at the upper arch, just a little distalization in the first quadrant, but now we don't want to talk about the staging. We would like to show you how you can see the gingiva and also the trim line. So at the end, the trim line, you can see it's exactly here in this area. So we need to remove the bone. And now this, what you can see here, this is exactly the trim line. And you can also change this trim line by communication in these cases. You can also explain the technician you would like to change the trim line from stage, 25 to 38, and you can individualize the trim line. And again, so this is also very interesting software because we can have a look at the bone, at everything, and you can show it in a different way. Yeah, so here's another example with the ClearCorrect software. And what is important for you to understand is that with ClearCorrect, you don't see the trim line. With ClearCorrect in the treatment plan, you see just the gingiva, but we know that the aligner goes over the gingiva. But this is something that we don't show in the treatment plan. But this is automatical in every treatment plan for ClearCorrect. But for ClearCorrect, the aligner always goes over the gingiva. So that's the big difference between all the other systems. That's very important for you to understand. Yeah, here you can see an Invisalign case. And for Invisalign, it's a little bit different. So here you can see a very nice simulation of the gingiva, but you can have different simulations. Of course, this is the classical clean shake that you know without CBCT integration. And this is exactly the trim line. And for Invisalign, the trim line is always 100% exactly what you can see here. You can make different, or you have different views, and here you can also see exactly in this area you will find the trim line. But with Invisalign, you cannot change the trim line. So the trim line is always the same. But Invisalign is the only system with optimized attachments. So we have a different force system with Invisalign, which is very important to understand. So we do not need to change the trim line. We also have different functions like power ridges and so on, which I will explain much more in detail in the next modules. But just for you to understand now, I explained you all the differences. So we have the different systems and we have different ideas of trim line, and we can also change the trim lines in some systems. So again, most facturers use the gingiva margin as a trim line. In some particular cases, you can extend to get better anchorage. Use the staging and the attachments for your advantage. And this is also something that the software is not always doing automatically. Just as an example, you have a single tooth intrusion and you would really like to achieve this intrusion. Sometimes we need to do step-by-step movements, which is very easy to do, no problem at all, but the software is not doing it automatically. Because of that, you need to know it, you need to understand it, and you need sometimes to individually change that in your treatment plan. This is a very good example. So we set the correct staging to open a small gap to release approximal contacts. Open contacts for movements is the best trick in digital treatment planning ever. One of the most important tricks. Why? Because if I do not open a gap, I have, let's say, I have compression forces. I need to do IPR clinically. I have a lot of problems. So if I do this step by step, if I open the gap before, I open the contact and then I do the movement, everything will be much easier. So setting attachments to apply forces properly from occlusal, and then at the end you need to close the gaps. And I will just show this in the digital treatment plan. And I will also explain you that this is very easy to do and it really helps you to reduce the amount of refinements. So what you can see here, and this is an older treatment, and this happened very often, it's like we try to get out of this crossbite correction and you can already see the approximate contacts. So we have a problem. We would like to correct this, but what is the software doing? The software is not doing a distal movement of the 7. That's the reason why we need to do IPR in the premolar area. And so we have a lot of compression in this area. And now we try to do the buccal movement of the 6. And we will have very, very hard and strong approximal contacts. So at a minimum, clinically, you need to open the contact here to allow this movement. So why not doing this movement a little bit more intelligent and a little bit more step by step, which is very, very easy to do. And which is the way that we like to do it. So do the movement step by step and you will have a very, very, very good predictable digital treatment plans, as you can see here. So what you can see here is that, and this is most important, we first open the gap. It's very easy to do, no problem at all. Why shouldn't we not first do the distal movement of the 7? Open it. Now we have enough space for the buccal movement at the end. Very carefully we close it. So this is very, very easy to do. And this is not only for distal movement crossbite correction. This is also for single tooth intrusion. So many movements are so much easier when I open some gaps to allow these movements in a very, very, very easy way. Yeah, and that's the reason why we use the staging and also the attachments for our advantage. Now we go to the next step and we talk about Tets and implants. Why? Because I already explained to you that the biggest problem in digital treatment planning is we need to make it predictable, but we do not want to frustrate the patient. And sometimes we need to find a good balance to do it. Sometimes the best balance is, okay, we program the movements a little bit more simultaneously, but at the moment we do it more simultaneously, we need more anchorage. We need different anchorage. And therefore, yes, of course, we can use Tets, implants, you can use skeletal anchorage to make these movements even more predictable. And if we do it like that, yes, of course, we need to take care of the movements, and sometimes we need to do some movements a little bit more simultaneously, but that needs to be communicated to the technician. We need to communicate that we have another strategy and that we would like to move some teeth a little bit more simultaneously. For some movements, we definitely need auxiliary techniques. When it comes to mesialization, it's really not easy to do bodily movement for mesialization. It could be much easier and better if we have a better anchorage system, if we can do these movements more simultaneously, or more bodily. So if we use sliders, this is much easier and we can guarantee much better that we have bodily movements. So there are still some movements in Alignerorthodontics that are not 100% perfect predictable, but we can help ourselves if we use auxiliaries. Yeah, here we can find an example when it really makes sense to use sliders like a mesial slider. So we have a huge amount of mesial movement of tooth number 27. And if we have this huge amount of mesialization, sometimes it's really not easy to do this movement bodily. So we need a support. And this is where we sometimes, or where the doctor sometimes is using a mesial slider to support that. And again, in the next modules, we will explain exactly what we need to do, how do we need to program the digital treatment plan if we use sliders, what do we need to think about. But in this particular moment, I would like to explain you that, not every movement can be done 100% perfect with an aligner. We need auxiliaries. And we will explain everything in detail in the next modules. And sometimes if we do not use the right staging, if we do not use auxiliary techniques, yes, we have typical side effects. So we always have these side effects if we have a lack of anchorage. So the lack of anchorage can affect the results, of course. And sometimes this is very bad, we have really hard side effects. Of course, you see them during your monitoring process. That's the reason why you need to be very careful with the monitoring. And then earlier you find these problems, then better you can do something against it. This is also something we will discuss in the next modules. But especially the effect number 1, which is the bowing effect, that very often comes because I do some movements too simultaneously, or I don't use auxiliary techniques. With the bowing effect, I can always see that there is a force in the aligner, but this force is not going to the right teeth. And the bowing effect looks like this very often. So we open the bite a little bit in premolar area because we have some reciprocal forces sometimes in the anterior and the posterior area. And what happened is like, wow, we have a bowing effect. This can also come because I don't do enough IPR in the mouth of the patient, even if I clinically have planned it. So there can be a lot of reasons why I have a bowing effect. And we will also show you what you can do against the bowing effect in the next modules. The next thing that I would like to explain, what also can happen is a posterior open bite. So there are different ideas why sometimes we have a posterior open bite during our in our clinical results. So we have an aligner thickness with most of the aligner manufacturers of an average 0.75 millimeters. So now we have these 0.75 millimeter in upper and lower arch. So we have 1.5 millimeter. We hire the occlusion for the patient during the whole treatment time. So what happens? In most of the cases, we don't have a real posterior intrusion. In most of the cases, we have the effect that we have a little outer rotation of the mandibular. We have pre-contacts of the anteriors. So we only have anterior contacts or contacts in the canine area, and the patient is not able to, the bite setting is not perfectly, so we have a posterior open bite. That's the reason why also in the treatment planning process, sometimes we need to do a little more proclination of upper anteriors. We need to create a little more space. And this is what we will also show you. And we also show this you in the different software. Protruding or proclined anteriors. This side effect is also very often when I have too many simultaneously movements in the posteriors. So the posteriors, they are not going to the distal. We have reciprocal forces. We have proclination of upper anteriors. So it could be that you have a distalization case, but you can see at stage 12, 15, or I don't know, that there is a little gap between the aligner and the incisor edge of upper anteriors.